My presentation is over Manifest Destiny. So to start, in the US, there had been two economic depressions which encouraged most Americans to move west because, for one, land over there was cheaper and they needed a fresh start from these economic crises. And then in 1803, President Jefferson buys Louisiana Territory, the entire Louisiana Purchase, which started America's westward expansion. And then also in 1832, President Monroe drafted his Monroe Doctrine, which warned European nations not to interfere with America's westward expansion, which would be later known as Manifest Destiny. Texas independence. So in 1821, Mexico won its independence from Spain. However, in the Texas region, there were still a lot of Anglo settlers. Like, there were more of them than there were Hispanic settlers. So then in 1836, Texas won its independence from Mexico and looked to join the U.S. However, President Jackson and President after him, President Van Buren, both did not want to annex Texas because they feared, one, war with Mexico, and two, many Americans at the time thought that the annexation of Texas was just a reason to increase slavery. There were a lot of abolitionists at the time, so they did not want that. And then in 1846, President Polk officially annexed Texas into the U.S. nation. Annexing Texas was not easy at all. There was an entire war called the Mexican-American War, which basically Mexico stated that if America tried to annex Texas, that they would go to war. And then President Polk decided to annex Texas, but also President Polk offered to buy California, New Mexico, and basically all of what today is southwestern America. And once his offer to annex and his offer to buy those lands was turned down, Polk decided it was time to fight, and he started sending troops over to Mexican territories, and American Congress declared war on May 13th, 1846. So first we see Colonel Stephen Kearny and Comrade Robert Stockton conquer the lands north of the Rio Grande River with ease. And then General Zachary Taylor pushed through setbacks to finally capture the city of Monterrey. Then after that, Mexico realized that they were losing a lot of people, and they turned to this old standby, General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who basically double-crossed America. He told President Polk, he said, "If you allow me to go to Mexico, I will end this war in terms favorable to the U.S." So then Santa Anna goes down to Mexico, and instead of doing what he told President Polk he was going to do, he actually joined the Mexican army and helped them fight against America. So then in the Battle of Buena, Santa Anna basically faced a lot of losses fighting against America, but maybe that's what he gets for double-crossing the U.S. Meanwhile, U.S. troops led by General Winfield Scott took over the city of Veracruz, and after that they started marching toward Mexico City. And in Mexico City, they besieged, so they took hold of Mexico City Chapultepec Castle and surrounded it, and the Mexican military school cadets, they basically decided to kill themselves rather than to surrender to Americans. But after that, the Americans retreated, and basically the war was over. And at this point, America is just waiting for Mexican government to reappear so that they could make negotiations with them. So then, in February 2nd, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, which basically established that the Rio Grande River was the border between U.S. and Mexico, and also Mexico sold California and sold all of that land for $15 million, and the U.S. gained 5,205,000 square miles of land from that, which later caused conflict in U.S. because there were battles over whether these new territories would be slave or non-slave, which ultimately leads to the Civil War. So now we go to the coining of Manifest Destiny. So the term Manifest Destiny was coined by John L. O'Sullivan, and it first appeared in 1845 in this newspaper essay that he wrote called The Democratic Review. And basically in that essay, he's just criticizing all of these people who were opposing the new annexation of Texas. So O'Sullivan stated how other countries have tried to impose on America's manifest destiny and trying to limit power. And he states directly, the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for free development of our yearly multiplying millions. So this basically means that manifest destiny is America's God-given mission to spread their control and their democracy as much as they can. So all the way west as they can, all the way to the Pacific Ocean. And later, the term is used to describe Oregon Territory because America wanted Oregon Territory as well. Oregon Territory in 1824, Russia drafted this treaty which claimed that it was seceding from North America, and basically it stated this border right here. It stated where that was, but it did not state where to draw the line between American and British control. So that's what the entire Oregon border dispute is over. So President James K. Polk was very, very supportive of Manifest Destiny, and he very, very much wanted to expand into Oregon. And he claimed it clear and unquestionable, and it was also part of his candidacy, the slogan 5440 or fight, which 5440 would be the potential border in this dispute. So in 1846, the Secretary of State James Buchanan drafted the Oregon Treaty of 1846, declaring that Oregon's border was the 49th parallel just south of Vancouver, which is this line right here, which that ended the entire dispute, just setting that border right there. So Manifest Destiny had a crazy impact on Native Americans, mainly because Americans believed they had divine right, so they believed that they were allowed to just invade into all of these native lands and relocate them and move them and displace them all that they wanted. An example of this would be when Jackson enforced the Indian Removal Act of 1830, basically stating that he wanted to move all of these Indians to a new spot because they were in their way of their manifest destiny. So during the transition from moving all these Indians here to here, it caused this very tragic event called the Trail of Tears, which was when all of these Indians were going to the new location, but it was very, very harsh conditions, and it ended up killing thousands of Native Americans through disease and exposure and just exhaustion. Having to move that far was a lot. But overall, like, America going westward ended up killing 4,000 to 6,000 Native Americans, which is a crazy number. So this escalated conflict between U.S. and Native Americans because as the U.S. settlers go to settle in these native lands, the Native Americans would get really mad and they would fight them, which overall just increases tensions in general. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about Manifest Destiny. Love you, Professor Sewell.